Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. Anyone who has lived in New York City over the last 30 years can't help noticing how the urbanscape has changed. From a mixture of buildings of medium height and traditional skyscrapers, Manhattan has become a profusion of glass skyscrapers so tall that they not only block out the sun, they appear to defy gravity and wind itself. In her new book, Wonder City: How to Reclaim Human-Scale Urban Life, urban activist and scholar Lynn Ellsworth describes how powerful real estate developers use their power over politicians and technocrats to build ever taller buildings. And instead of supplying more housing and lower rents, they have raised the cost of housing and made the entire city a less desirable place to live. Welcome. In your book, you lament the time when New York was a wonder city. What happened?
What happened was they started to demolish it, starting in the late 50s, 60s, just incrementally. Real estate in kind of league with modernist architecture philosophy about the design of buildings, set about destroying what they thought were, sort of they didn't see it as the Wonder City. They wanted it gone. They wanted tenement housing gone. They wanted to rebuild the central business district, and they did. And in the doing, they destroyed much of it. I mean, there's quite a bit left, let's say. New York has more Wonder City left than any other big city in
But a lot of it's gone.
But a lot of it is gone.
You said there were really two visions competing, even now, two competing visions of how the city should be developed going forward. And one is Towerization, and the other one favors a more human scale of urban life. What's the Towerization? Where does that come from?
Well, Towerization comes from a couple of forces, mostly from the real estate industry, as well as the modern architecture world that sees this as the only legitimate building form. But the real estate industry has really been behind it, and they have wanted to build speculative towers for years and years, and they do so, and they have convinced politicians, I think, that that is the only legitimate kind of economic development that we can do in New York. They even propose it for Governor's Island, which is a park. That's their idea of how to develop the city. More, and towers. Now, enter into that situation, we have economist Ed Glaeser, Harvard urban housing economist, who insists that the only way to supply affordable housing is to relentlessly towerize, and then we'll have a flood of supply of housing units, and that will, at some future point, eventually prices will trickle down. It's a free market ideology, and it's an anti-regulatory ideology. And the Manhattan Institute got behind him, which is run by a lot of very conservative donors. And the real estate industry loved this. Oh my God, we have Ed Glaeser promoting our vision. So we have this constellation of forces pushing that. And because of our weak campaign finance laws, our weak regulatory system, the real estate industry was able to just take over incrementally, bit by bit, all those forces that might have opposed that vision.
Has trickle-down ever been shown to work to provide a lot more affordable housing or bring rent prices down?
No. People argue a little bit about, maybe that happened in Austin or Dallas, but to be honest, that's very speculative interpretation of existing data about that. So no, and certainly can't happen in New York City. And
you talk about the influence of the architecture world on what gets built. Modernist architecture, basically talking about steel, glass, and
cement, concrete,
and cement. And what's the look of it? What's the look of it?
Well, I think if you go around and look at any of the early sort of public housing projects that with sort of towers in a park setting, like that's basically what they recommend. They like ribbon windows, they like flat roofs, no decoration, or another model is a similar one is the Mies van der Rohe skyscrapers, just a glass box rising. That's considered a legitimate modernist form. That's what they advocate for. Their point of view is that we need to erase the architecture of the past, that it doesn't exist for us, for the modernist architecture. It's ideologically they are opposed to it, and they see their movement as a way to squash it, ruin it, destroy it, replace it. And they're very explicit about that. Their gurus, who are, their founding gurus, are very explicit. I think architects these days don't quite know where this came from. I have a friend who, I was walking along Duane Street where I live downtown, and Paul Goldberger describes it as this perfectly intact 19th century great place. And the Landmarks Commission approved a glass tower on top of one of these old buildings. And I was with an architect trained in the modernist tradition, and I said, well, why can't they just make it brick and make it look like the rest of the building? And he said, well, you can't. You just can't. That's copying. And I was like, that would be kitsch.
Copying the past.
Yeah, it's copying the past, and that would be kitsch. It could never, ever look like the past. But I said, well, where do you get that idea? Like, he goes, I don't know. This is architecture today. He doesn't even know where the idea came from.
So the philosophy is that periodically, in order to capture the spirit of the current time, to be modern, you have to tear down what you had in the past, you have to demolish it, and you have to build something different.
Right.
Most modernist buildings, you say in your book, are ugly and soulless, and people don't like them.
I agree with that, and I think there's a lot of data to support that. Now, it's become chic in New York, to follow an architecture critic who says, oh, look at this new building, and it's crystalline and elegant, and they use words like that to describe it. But I think most people look at it, and it's not, let's take the Gehry building, down in Lower Manhattan. It's this giant, twisted, shard-looking thing that sticks up above an historic area around it. And, people say, oh, well, it's a sculptural object. But it provides no urbanist context. Let me backtrack a little bit. Gehry designed that building not from the street level, where urbanism happens. He went up to a studio where he could see the skyline, and he designed to fit something new into the skyline that he thought was an art object. And that's a whole philosophy of treating new buildings in old cities as individual artistic icons that we can then, curate and discuss and talk about its aesthetics. But nobody talks, except the Jane Jacobs people, about the effect that building has on the street life, on the streetscape, on the shadowing, on the life of small business at the street level. Nobody talks about that. Look at Hudson Yards. It's just an amazing disaster at street level. Now, if you look at it from a distance, if you kind of like those objects, okay, but that's not how to build a city.
When I went to Hudson Yards, because I wanted to find out what it was all about, I wondered, so who is this for? This question, who is this for? Certainly when I was in I guess sort of the mall area there, all of the restaurants are so expensive. All of the clothing shops are so expensive. And you have all of these, the residents around them. This is not for regular people.
No, not at all.
Who is it for?
Well, it's for international speculative real estate capital that comes in. So New York City is, a winner city in a certain way, like Vancouver, San Francisco. And so these are places that the entire world wants to invest in real estate. So say I'm running the Swiss pension fund, and I have to invest all that money for Swiss pensioners. So a percentage of my portfolio is going to go in the stock market, and a percentage is going to go into real estate. And then they give the money, and they're like, well, where do we invest it in real estate? Well, it's Manhattan. And they just poured, just a tsunami of money has come into New York City since the Bloomberg years, looking to invest in. And they want to invest where they get the most rate of return. They want Class A, not cheap Class B, C office buildings. They don't want affordable housing. That's not profitable for them. They want luxury housing that they can rent out. So developers build for that. Now, Hudson Yards is a particularly bizarre case, in my opinion, because it was heavily subsidized by the public. The public till provided a huge chunk of that. It was empty for a long time, and the tenants who moved in at first, the office tenants, just moved from the Grand Central area. So they emptied one part of the city to try to fill up another part. And then they, of course, the real estate industry, well, it's still not enough. We want to rezone Midtown and make it taller, too. Like, it's just an infinite cycle of replacement. Even Midtown is being replaced.
So how have the developers been able to gain the power to do this?
They have incrementally gained power through time, through the campaign finance system, through which, they're the biggest donors to all politicians in New York State.
Okay.
Like, it's always REBNY, Real Estate Board of New York, doing that. The second method they have is because it's such a huge industry, there's a lot of players, they like to hire people right out of the city council to work in their industry. So there's this revolving door problem where nobody wants to be a squeaky wheel because when they leave government, they're going to work for big real estate in one form or the other.
Right.
And that's a huge problem. And then, I don't think people foresaw how easy it would be to fill up our regulatory agencies like the Department of City Planning, the Landmarks Commission, the Bureau of Standards and Appeals. These are the agencies that deal with real estate.
And regulate what
happens.
developers can build.
Right. They set the rules and they arbitrate disputes. And real estate is managed by cozying up to mayors to get their appointees put on all those bodies. So, like, it's a phalanx, if you're against it, like, who do you fight? You go to city planning, you make your complaint, they're like, yeah, that's nice, but, we're basically in the real estate industry, so, we can't help you.
Isn't it also because public officials see ever taller buildings, ever bigger buildings as a sign of power, as a sign of growth, that's how they measure how the city is growing?
Yes. Well, this confusion that ever higher towers, ever more speculative office development, that is a proxy for economic development and growth is a fantasy. I'm an economist. I'm like a real one. I have a PhD from UW-Madison. It's like our program is as tough as any in the country. And economists don't have a theory of economic growth. We don't know what causes growth. It's not population growth, because there are plenty of places that grew their population and just went poor. It's not just free trade, because there's plenty of places where free trade led to immiseration of people. It's not just capital investment, because it's a mystery. Now, there are some correlates to economic growth and prosperity that are better indicators for a politician. Like, instead of counting tall buildings as our proxy for developing the city, education of the population, the investment in the public realm, like the quality of the public realm, the quality of the regional transit system. You make transit cheap, widespread, accessible to everyone, that creates, we think that is one of the causal factors of growth. We can't prove it, but it's, so you bring and small businesses. Small business are the engine of job growth throughout the entire country. So if you invest in those four things, you're doing the best you can to promote widespread prosperity and economic growth. It's not towerization. That's the glory of New York. It was the glory of New York. It's ground level commerce, mom and pop shops, not chain stores. And we never did a good job on that. They got overrun by Amazon and the big players, and there's so many factors described in the book that eroded the small business sector. They're who create jobs. And why aren't we investing in them?
Yeah.
It's a mystery to me that this sort of common sense approach to economic development is ignored by the city in favor of the real estate approach.
Now, we found that the sort of trickle-down theory that if you build these huge buildings, you will get more affordable housing eventually. We found that that's not true. Does this demolition and building up, does it bring in more tax revenues?
I think politicians feel that it does, that with the erosion of manufacturing in the city, we lost that source of revenue. Then we don't have really a significant value-added taxes, 8.5%. So the city feels that the only way to increase the amount of money in the city's budget is to have more property tax revenue coming in. And the Real Estate Board of New York loves this. They're always bragging, it's real estate revenue that is paying firemen, as if we're not also paying income taxes. And I think that to rectify that is going to be very hard. It's hard for municipalities anywhere to separate their need for ever-increasing need for more property tax revenue with their own budget desires. And I think that you can fix this, but it's going to be hard. You need to tax corporations here. We don't do that well anymore at all.
And you also pointed out that the taxes that are paid on these huge buildings, I mean, that a lot of developers are paying only an average of like 1%.
Yeah, the developers themselves don't end up paying many taxes. They get rich this way. Now, the people who buy in to their apartments that they build or their office, they pay property taxes.
Okay.
But we give tons of subsidies to the office development. You know, it's a terrible system for generating revenue, but I think the politicians think that's the only tool they've got. And therein lies the problem. Google, by the way, what kind of property taxes is Google paying? I just would like to know. What kind of income taxes is Google paying? You know, a lot of their money's hidden in Ireland and everywhere else. I'm thinking they're headquartered here, you know, what? That's a source of revenue. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, we taxed corporations at much higher levels than we do now. It's not that they're the only source of revenue, but you know, if we have a vision that we have to chase out manufacturing, rezone manufacturing zones, and transform them into office and luxury housing, the only source of revenue you're going to get in that scenario is property taxes.
Yeah.
So the city needs to rethink how they do that.
And there are all kinds of ways that real estate, big real estate, can get around the zoning rules. You know, this whole thing, purchasing air rights, promising to include some affordable housing in the luxury towers, but that only generates a very little amount, small amount
Right.
of affordable housing, right? And the building of these little public plazas, well, you know, we'll let you go up higher. We'll give you 6 more stories if you build a little plaza.
Yeah, one of those useless plazas that litter Lower Manhattan in particular. They're absolutely a total giveaway. So the zoning code is now thousands and thousands of pages of arcane exemptions and pathways to get around a public interest rule about something, to get around a height limit. It's an unbelievable mess. Zoning experts are completely like, whoa, how did we end up with this? And we know how we ended up with this. The real estate industry, because they control city planning, has managed, and because they hire a literal army of lawyers, they have managed to totally twist and transform the zoning code, which was never that good in the first place, into a mess that only they and their lawyers can profit from. And people have acknowledged this. You know, I think several experts, I quote them, are like, the zoning code now basically lets developers do anything they want, and they can get away with anything. And it's true. If you go to a Bureau of Standards and Appeal hearing, you know, to have where, say, a neighborhood group is protesting, like, you can't allow this change to happen to allow this tower. And there is an army of lawyers for big real estate in opposition, appealing before 3 commissioners who are controlled by big real estate, who are from the big real estate industry, and the citizens are lost from the get-go on that.
And you talk about how these citizens who are trying to preserve the nature of their neighborhoods and don't want this another tower coming in, how they just get steamrolled over. You know, nobody pays attention to them, basically.
It's tragic. It's tragic. I have been at city council hearings over one fight or another, and watching the city councilor members who have to be there for at least part of it, busy not listening to anybody. They're just like on their phones doing this and that, and then they leave and they walk away. And you know, I've waited sometimes 6, 7, 8 hours to give testimony to basically an empty room. And I know it's tape recorded somewhere and it's archived somewhere, but nobody's going to look at that.
Why don't, you know, the city council member, that's on the really local level.
Yeah.
Why don't they care about their own districts and their own neighborhoods?
Most of them get their campaign financing from big real estate, not from their neighborhood residents. So,
give me an example, you know, sort of quickly about one example of how the developers and public officials and the non-regulatory agencies have acted in concert to destroy a livable community and put towers up. Give me just one example.
just one example, there's so many. Well, let me give you the Seaport case. You know, the Seaport Historic District is very small. It's what's left of really a magnificent waterfront district with the fish market in. And there's an empty lot in it that used to be a thermometer factory. It's full of mercury in there. But it was bulldozed, so it's an empty lot. And developers have wanted to build there forever. But the city, when the Landmarks Commission was more functional, quite a few years ago, agreed with the local neighborhood group that, you know, we're going to allow this site, which is in the historic district, to be developed, but we're putting a pretty tough height limit on it, so it's contextual to the rest of the district. And so whatever comes up is probably going to end up having to have a brick facade and look vaguely part of the place. Well, Howard Hughes Corporation came in and said, no, we don't want that. We want this giant tower, and we will do anything to get it. And they spent maybe 5 years fighting the community to get this. They went to the Landmarks Commission, which is supposed to, you know, do its job. And they worked behind the scenes for months and months and months, met endlessly with the Howard Hughes Corporation, the Howard Hughes architects, and they came up with a plan to get around citizen opposition. They said, what we're going to do is we're going to give a little endowment to the Seaport Museum. Not much. We'll give it to the Economic Development Corporation, who will manage the endowment on behalf of this teeny little museum, which gets very few visitors. And so now we're saying is that you get a museum instead of, you know, a historic district, and that will be our bargain. And they then met privately with the Landmarks Commission. So all these people come in from Howard Hughes, and they hold a practice public hearing where they get all their ducks in a row about what we're going to say to the community, and we're going to approve this. There's a memo for it. It's in the book, you know, smoking gun. And that is called regulatory capture in my world. They have completely captured the Landmarks Commission.
So what's required to stop this, or at least to turn this around? And I know you gave many examples of changes
so
in
many
specific
changes,
policies,
but the first thing is that New Yorkers need to wake up that big real estate is running their city. And they have to basically eject big real estate from the campaign finance system, from the charter, all the rules that allow this to happen. And it's a more comprehensive reform of how the city is run. Now, that can only happen when New Yorkers take over and decide to do that. It's, you know, I think people are need to care more. That's what I think. People don't really often see Manhattan as a home. They see it as a place for a career, to make some money, and, you know, the elite, you know, well, we're just zooming off to our Hamptons house on the weekend, and, you know, that's a different attitude. Like, the city is the place that you take from, as opposed to a home where we're going to make this a livable place for ourselves, and we're going to stop the destruction. And so that's the problem, I think, is waking up the New York voters.
But, you know, as you pointed out, neighborhood people fight. I mean, they fight.
Yeah, they do.
And they rail against it. So you also mentioned it requires a mentality change. Is this a mentality change on the part of the people who run the city? I mean, elected officials, a change in how you view what growth is for the city?
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to need a new generation of politicians who understands this, because I think the current technocrats running things, they're never going to change. They're too much in bed with big real estate. It's just not going to happen. We need a new group emerging to come out and attack this. And I'm a member of a couple of political clubs, and I'm just dismayed that we're endorsing people for mayor, or, the same old people from the Democratic machine. And I've been supportive of Jim Walden, who's running as an independent. He's a lawyer. He's not at all affiliated with big real estate. It's very honest, like, let's clean this up. And we need more of that. We need really more of that. And I'm a little worried about sort of the farther left. I was a Bernie Sanders supporter and all that, but I see that the far left has taken a little bit too much the supply side reasoning, has gotten infiltrated in there about housing, and which is a demolition agenda. And I think that's a problem. The way to get affordable housing is to build affordable housing. You have to actually build 100% affordable housing. And that's always been the way. And you have to stop demolishing the housing we've got. And that message needs to get through, I think.
Well, I learned a lot that I didn't know from your book about how this whole real estate juggernaut operates. And from now on, when I see one of those obscenely tall spires, yet another one go up, I'll know where it came from.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm afraid we're out of time. I'd like to thank Lynn Ellsworth, author of Wonder City: How to Reclaim Human-Scale Urban Life, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Instagram at 1-to-1 CUNY TV. And you can watch the show on the go by downloading the CUNY TV app. For 1-to-1 and CUNY TV, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.